Think the perfect crime is impossible? Think again. From millions in stolen cash to priceless art gone missing, these heists left the world stunned. Some thieves escaped without a trace, while others couldn't outrun justice. Real-life criminals who outsmarted everyone, or thought they did. Get ready to dive into the biggest heists in history. The Hatton Garden Heist, London, 2015. The air was quiet over London that Easter weekend in 2015. The streets around Hatton Garden, the glittering center of the city's diamond trade, were silent. Offices closed, families gathered. The perfect weekend to disappear into the shadows. A white van pulled into a narrow alley behind the Hatton Garden safe deposit building. There was no rush, no screeching tires. Everything was calm, measured. Inside the van sat a group of unlikely suspects, pensioners. One of them, Brian Reeder, was 76 years old. Known in his prime as the Master, he hadn't been active in years. But this was to be his grand finale. What followed would go down as one of the boldest burglaries in British history. The crew of 6 elderly thieves didn't use brute force. They used patience, precision, and decades of criminal expertise. Security alarms were deactivated. CCTV cameras were tampered with. No one was watching. They entered the building through a shared elevator shaft, disabled a metal security gate, and then reached the main vault room. Waiting for them was a 20-inch thick wall of reinforced concrete. They had brought the right tool for the job, a Hilti DD-350 industrial drill. Over the course of hours, they bored a hole large enough for a man to crawl through. When they emerged on the other side, they stood inside a vault lined with nearly 1,000 safety deposit boxes. Each one a private world of valuables, hidden wealth, secrets never meant to be disturbed. The thieves worked methodically, breaking open over 70 of the boxes: diamonds, gold, cash, gemstones, collectibles. The total haul would eventually be estimated at over 14 million pounds, nearly 20 million US dollars. It was a staggering score, pulled off without setting off a single alarm. They left the vault exactly as they found it. From the outside, everything looked untouched. They even returned the following night to finish the job. But the perfect crime began to unravel almost immediately. Forensics experts found minute traces of DNA. Investigators pieced together security footage from surrounding streets and identified the crew's van. From there, the web tightened. The men had relied on old habits: burner phones, coded language, shady warehouses. But in the age of digital surveillance, those precautions weren't enough. Within weeks, most of the crew were arrested. One of them had kept part of the loot in his bedroom, tucked away in garbage bags. Another had recorded conversations in which he bragged about the job. In court, the media dubbed them the bad grandpas. Their average age was 63. Their combined criminal experience stretched back to the 1960s. Despite their age, their plan had been brilliant. But their undoing was classic: greed, ego, and a failure to adapt to a world where cameras watched every step. Still, the Hatton Garden job became legendary, not just for the amount stolen, but for the sheer audacity. An Ocean's 11-style heist pulled off by a gang of aging professionals in a city brimming with technology and surveillance. For a moment, they had fooled the world. Banco Central burglary, Fortaleza, Brazil, 2005. Half a world away, a very different job was unfolding a decade earlier, one even more surreal in its execution. In the summer of 2005, residents of Fortaleza, Brazil, thought little of the small storefront with a green awning on a quiet street. The business claimed to sell synthetic grass and landscaping supplies. Men came and went throughout the day. There was noise, deliveries, and plenty of dust. Nothing suspicious, but beneath their feet, something incredible was happening. From that unassuming building, a crew of thieves was digging a tunnel straight into the Banco Central vault, more than 2 city blocks away. The planning was meticulous. The tunnel took 3 months to complete. It was reinforced with wood and concrete, lit by electric lamps, and equipped with ventilation systems. The men worked in shifts, hauling tons of earth away through the front of the store under the guise of daily business. They even paid taxes on their fake landscaping company to avoid suspicion. The tunnel extended nearly 250 feet beneath the city streets, sloping downward at a precise angle, avoiding pipes, power lines, and underground hazards. At the far end lay the target, the heavily secured vault of the Banco Central's regional headquarters, containing massive quantities of cash, nearly all of it in Brazilian reais, untraceable paper currency scheduled to be removed from circulation. On the night of August 6th, they broke through the reinforced concrete floor of the vault. What they found was more than they had dreamed of. Piles of bundled currency stacked waist-high. The bills were used, non-sequential, and unmarked, perfect for vanishing without a trace. By Monday morning, the staff arrived to find the vault breached from below. Over 160 million reais, approximately 70 million US dollars, were gone. There were no alarms, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry, just a gaping hole in the floor. Panic spread quickly. The bank had been considered one of the most secure in Brazil, but the gang hadn't needed to crack the locks or bypass the doors. They simply came in from underneath. Investigators were stunned. It took days to fully comprehend the scale of the operation. Forensics teams mapped the tunnel, marveling at its precision. Police combed through CCTV footage, collected fingerprints, and began piecing together the identities of the suspects. The heist's mastermind was Antonio Yusivan Alves dos Reis, a career criminal with a sharp mind and a knack for logistics. He and his crew had orchestrated what many called the heist of the century. But like the Hatton Garden gang, their downfall came from within. One of the members was kidnapped by another gang demanding a cut of the money. Others flaunted their newfound wealth. Several were captured, but only a fraction of the stolen money was ever recovered. The rest vanished, laundered, hidden, perhaps buried beneath the ground, just like the tunnel that led them to fortune. The Banco Central burglary remains one of the largest bank heists in modern history. It was quiet, calculated, and almost surreal in its success. No weapons, no violence, just dirt, engineering, and determination. In both London and Fortaleza, the thieves had studied their targets like chessboards. They knew the guards, the schedules, the architecture. They trusted in silence and shadows. They avoided the high-tech alarms and instead relied on old-school discipline. But in the end, even the best-laid plans cracked under pressure. No vault is impenetrable. No secret lasts forever. And sometimes the greatest crimes are committed not with guns, but with drills, shovels, and silence. The Lufthansa heist, New York, 1978. In the early morning hours of December 11, 1978, the air on the tarmac of JFK Airport in New York hung heavy with frost. Inside the Lufthansa cargo building, things were quiet. A skeleton crew handled paperwork and small shipments. There was no reason to expect trouble. But just after 3 a.m., a black Ford Econoline van rolled silently into the lot and backed up to a side door. 6 armed men wearing ski masks and long coats leapt out. They moved with military precision, one of them holding a clipboard to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. The guards barely had time to react. They were forced to the ground, duct-taped, and held at gunpoint. The robbers knew exactly where to go. No wandering, no searching. They moved through the corridors of the cargo building like they had practiced it 100 times. Because they had. Led by James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, a notorious associate of the Lucchese crime family, the Lufthansa heist wasn't just a robbery, it was a strategic operation executed by organized crime at its sharpest. Inside the vault was $5 million in untraceable U.S. currency, flown in from West Germany and intended for international currency exchange. Along with the cash were $875,000 worth of jewelry. Adjusted for inflation, the total haul would top $25 million today. They were in and out in less than an hour. No shots fired, no alarms tripped. When morning came, the news exploded across the country. It was the largest cash robbery ever committed on American soil at the time. But the true story didn't end there. In fact, it had barely begun. The heist's brilliance was matched only by the brutality that followed. Jimmy Burke, paranoid and determined to keep the money for himself, began eliminating anyone he thought might talk. One by one, the men involved started turning up dead, shot, strangled, frozen, or disappeared entirely. Associates, drivers, even a guy who bought his girlfriend a flashy new car from his share of the loot, none were safe. Authorities had suspects. They had informants. But they didn't have the evidence to convict Burke or his inner circle. The money was never recovered. The jewels vanished into the black market, and those who remained alive kept their mouths shut. Years later, the Lufthansa heist would be immortalized in pop culture, most famously in Goodfellas, where the chaos and greed of the aftermath took center stage. But beneath the Hollywood gloss was a chilling truth. The robbery was more than a cash grab. It was a ruthless chess game between men willing to do anything to come out on top. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Heist, Boston, 1990. 12 years later, another kind of robbery would unfold, this time not on an airstrip, but inside the quiet, elegant halls of a Boston art museum. It was the early hours of March 18, 1990, the day after St. Patrick's Day. Most of the city was still sleeping off the revelry when two men dressed as police officers rang the buzzer at the side entrance of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The guards on duty, young, inexperienced, and hungover, let them in without hesitation. "We're here about a disturbance," one of the fake officers said. Moments later, the guards were handcuffed and duct-taped to pipes in the museum's basement. The men revealed themselves for what they were: thieves, calm, calculated, unafraid. They had free rein inside the museum for 81 minutes, an eternity in the world of professional theft. What they stole wasn't money or gold, it was beauty, culture, priceless history. 13 pieces of art were taken, ripped from their frames with shocking force. Among them were Vermeer's The Concert, one of only 34 known paintings by the Dutch master, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and a Manet, a Degas, and even an ancient Chinese beaker. The artwork's total value? Over $500 million. It remains the largest art theft in modern history. But what made the crime truly bizarre was the method. The thieves didn't seem to be in a hurry. They didn't take the most valuable pieces in the museum. They ignored the Titian. They bypassed the Michelangelo. Why? To this day, no one knows. Some believe they were stealing to order, collecting trophies for a secretive private collector. Others suspect the job was linked to the Boston mob, but none of the artwork has ever resurfaced. Not one frame has been filled. Not a single suspect has been definitively charged. The investigation has spanned decades, involving the FBI, international art dealers, and former gang members. The museum still hangs the empty frames in place, a haunting reminder of what was lost. And the reward for information? $10 million, still unclaimed. In its silence, the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist has become something more than a robbery. It's a mystery, a cultural wound, a ghost story in the world of fine art, the kind of story that lives in whispers, in auction houses and underground vaults, waiting for a clue that may never come. The Great Train Robbery, England, 1963. The train moved through the dark countryside of Buckinghamshire with a rhythmic pulse. It was August 8, 1963, and the mail train from Glasgow to London was running on schedule. On board were 72 post office staff and a quiet cargo worth far more than stamps or letters. In the second carriage, locked tight and under heavy guard, sat over £2.6 million in used banknotes, the equivalent of more than $70 million today. At 3:03 a.m., just after the train passed the small station of Leighton Buzzard, the driver saw a red signal. He slowed to a stop, confused. That signal had no business being read. Before he could question it, a masked man appeared at the window, wielding an iron bar. The driver was pulled from the cabin. Another man took his place at the controls. But the robbers weren't there to hijack the whole train, only the high-value carriage. 15 men swarmed the locomotive like clockwork. No guns, no bloodshed, only blunt tools, rope, and military-like precision. They uncoupled the engine and first two cars, shunting the rest of the train out of the way. The stolen section rolled forward into a secluded underpass, Bridego Bridge, where the rest of the gang waited with canvas bags and gloved hands. Over the next 30 minutes, they unloaded sack after sack of money into waiting trucks. They worked in silence, disciplined, efficient, no shouting, no chaos. They had rehearsed this for months, using model trains, walkie-talkies, and aerial photographs. Their inside man had told them when the train would carry the most cash. Their signalman had tampered with the railway lights. Even the driver had been handpicked, trained in secret to move the massive engine just enough to reach the ambush point. When they vanished into the pre-dawn dark, they left behind a stunned and bloodied train crew, but no fatalities. The robbers regrouped at Leatherslade Farm, a remote hideout they'd prepared with food, beds, and news coverage. They counted the haul, celebrated quietly, and began to disappear into the wind. But the plan didn't account for time. They stayed too long. Fingerprints were left on plates, Monopoly pieces, a ketchup bottle. An anonymous tip-off led police to the farmhouse, and soon the net closed. 13 of the gang were caught. The trial became a national sensation. Harsh sentences followed, up to 30 years, but some, including the notorious Ronnie Biggs, escaped prison and vanished into the world for decades, living as folk legends, criminals turned ghosts. The Great Train Robbery became one of Britain's most infamous crimes. It had no high-tech gadgets, no digital footprints, just timing, trust, and a belief that if the plan was bold enough, it could be flawless. It wasn't. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, Belgium 2003. London, 1987. Knightsbridge, a neighborhood of elegance and wealth, just minutes from Hyde Park and Harrods. Hidden beneath one of its opulent streets was a vault meant to be impenetrable, a private safe deposit facility where the elite of London stored their treasures. Cash, gold, documents, jewelry. On July 12th, a well-dressed Italian man entered the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center, claiming he wanted to rent a box. He was charming, polite, perfectly unremarkable. The manager showed him inside. He took note of the layout, the cameras, the guards, everything. Moments later, a second man entered. Then came the guns. The two men pulled pistols and quickly overpowered the manager and security guard. Handcuffs, duct tape, silence. Once the facility was secured, they locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Then the rest of the crew came in through the rear, tools in hand, faces calm. Over the next few hours, they set to work, not just breaking into a few boxes, but cracking open hundreds. They knew what they were looking for, wealth that couldn't be tracked, no serial numbers, no names. The robbery wasn't loud, there were no sirens, no frantic escapes. By the time they finished, the gang had emptied over 120 safe deposit boxes, stealing more than 60 million pounds, over $100 million today, in cash, diamonds, bullion, and more. When staff returned the next morning, they found chaos, splintered metal, shattered locks, empty boxes. The police had never seen anything like it. This was no gang of aging ex-cons or small-time burglars. It was the work of Valerio Vici, a suave, highly intelligent Italian playboy with a passion for fast cars, fine clothes, and luxury beyond the law. Vici was already wanted in Italy for more than 50 armed robberies. In London, he had set up the Knightsbridge job as his masterpiece, and for a while it worked. But arrogance would be his undoing. After fleeing to South America, Vici couldn't resist the pull of his London lifestyle. He returned to the UK to collect his beloved Ferrari Testarossa. Police were waiting. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Yet even behind bars, his myth only grew. He charmed guards, courted women, and gave interviews in designer suits. He even convinced authorities to release him to an open prison in Italy. In 2000, during a temporary leave to work at a law firm, Vici attempted to rob again and was killed in a gunfight with police. The Knightsbridge safe deposit robbery remains one of the largest heists in British history, not just in value, but in sheer audacity. It was elegance meets ruthlessness, orchestrated with a thief's charm and a soldier's timing. For a brief, gleaming moment, he had it all.